It's really a pleasure to be with you. And I want to say a special hello to someone I know, actually. I see Paul Lipst. So I want to say hello, Paul. And others, I already feel the friendly faces. I must say this is not a talk that I expected to give. In fact, it's, an earthquake has taken place in the Jewish world, and it's difficult to speak about what I did want to speak about, but I think in order for you to begin to approximate the type of earthquake that took place in Europe, I think I have to introduce you to a new Jewish voice in Europe, and then perhaps we can understand the width and depth and breadth of what has taken place. I hadn't meant it to be this way, but as I looked at what I wanted to say to you tonight, I realized everything came in triplets. It comes in groups of three. It was unmeaning, but nevertheless, it has no metaphysical significance. This is not the Trinity. This is not the Hegelian triangle. But do keep three in mind. And I'll start out with three things about myself personally, because I think it has bearing on what I want to say. I've lived almost equal amount of my life on three different continents. I won't tell you how long that is because I know you're quick at numbers and you'll probably figure out very quickly. So, but I was born in the United States, Madison, Wisconsin. I went to school and graduate school in New York. And then my husband and I, who was a conservative rabbi, came to Israel in 1967, where we spent another third of our lives, first in Ashkelon, then in Ashkelon, which is now rather notorious for what it's had to go through, Ashkelon, and then Jerusalem, and now Tel Aviv. And a third of my life I've spent on the European continent, in Sweden. But not only in Sweden, but in Europe per se. And I say that to give you not just my biography, but to say that if you wanted to ask me what my citizenship is, I pay taxes in all three, I have citizenship in all three, but my true citizenship is Jewish. And from my Jewish perspective, I want to be able to say to you, and say it more than just a visitor, these are three very different Judaisms. I just anecdotally, I can begin to tell you how different the cultures are. I mean, if, for example, let's say you hear, you're in an apartment house in New York and you hear your neighbor in the hall. You go out, you also want to go out, and you maybe share an elevator and you'll exchange some niceties. Okay, that's New York. In Tel Aviv, you're in an apartment house, your neighbor is in the hall, you go out and you end up probably arguing about politics, having coffee, and maybe in a really very difficult dispute. In Sweden, you hear a neighbor in the hall and you wait until they leave before you go through the door. Now, you might think this is strange. It's not strange at all, and I'll explain it to you in a minute. Let me give you another anecdote. Let's say that in Sweden, in the United States, you want to have a conversation, you end up talking ultimately about yourself, may I say. In Israel, your conversation, you talk about yourself, but you talk about yourself in terms of the nation, where I served in the army, what I did, I was a pioneer, when I came to, what wars I've been a part of. It's always an I that's always a we. In Sweden, you end up interrupting the next person who's talking if you're in Israel. In Sweden, you neither interrupt nor ever do you talk about yourself. Now, why would that be the case? I just want to emphasize for you how different these cultures are. In Sweden, in fact, it's written in a law, into almost a law in a novel. One of the laws by which you grow up by is you're no better than anyone else. So do you know what that means? You grow up thinking, I'm not waiting. In fact, if I have to put myself forward, that's very difficult for me. It's painful for me. And so I listen to others, not waiting to talk myself. These are three different cultures, and I want to make a claim to you that the three Jewish cultures are very different as well. Let me use a metaphor. And if Jewish civilization is a seed, then you take that seed and you plant it in the rich soil of America, and you watch it begin to flourish. It begins to flourish with institutions and synagogues and different forms of synagogues and different forms of organizing oneself into communities. In 1955, Will Herberg wrote what was a definitive work called Protestant Catholic Jew. You were an American by being a Jew. But into being a Jew, you were also an American. We weren't a minority. That was at least how we perceived it then, certainly in 1955. But if you wanted to know in America, let me put it this way, that seed was planted and you learned how to be a Jew in all sorts of different creative forms. You take that same seed of Jewish civilization and you put it in the sandy soil of Israel. Well, the roots have to go very deep in order to get water, but once they go deep, then you begin to have something so well rooted in its own soil, and it begins to produce its own culture. And we've had this privilege in Israel of being able to if America is the how to be Jewish, we can tell you what it is to be Jewish, what it is to create a culture, what it is to speak in your own language and have drama and poetry and art that is Jewish, and we can become a Jewish, what it is to be Jewish. You take that same seed of Jewish civilization, and now you take it and you bring it to the charred earth of Europe. Well, and as someone who I love very dearly once said, you know what? We're the grass growing underneath the ashes. I want to tell you now about Europe. In order to understand the catastrophe that's taken place, this earthquake of October 7th, let's understand not the Europe that you have in your mind of the black and white pictures of the Holocaust, but a new Europe. And now I'm going to speak to you again in threes. I'd like, if I could, to share something with you, and that is the new Europe. Hold on just one moment. I don't know why it is paused, but it is. Let me stop the share and start all over. Okay. Leora, I might have to ask you to do this because for some reason it's paused for me. My share screen.
Okay, Barbara, I just.
Okay, if you could get on with it,
sure.
Please, Leora. Thank you.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
There you go. Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to put it in PowerPoint mode.
Okay, I want to talk to you about a new Europe, and I'll have to talk to you about three contexts for this European Jewry. It's based upon the notion of a new Europe. Okay, Leora? There were three things that took place in Europe post-war, after the war. The first was a series of, much under the impetus of the United States, a series of treaties meant to really eradicate the blatant nationalism that had been so destructive to Europe until the end of the Second World War, and to create a Europe. It started off with the Schuman Declaration in 1950, which was essentially an economic participation between West Germany and France about the sharing of coal and other resources. Then came the treaties of Rome, which was again basically an economic treaty. The definitive treaty was in 1992, the Maastricht Treaty, which is really established with what we know now. And here now is a new Europe. It's called the European Union. And the European Union's expressed desire was to create a new Europe based upon certain universal principles of human rights and minority rights, and the ability for different cultures to flourish, but for the first time, perhaps, Europe not only to be a place, a continent, but also to be a space where there could be a European identity. Went on the adoption of the Euro in 1999, 2002, and then there were the enlargements, and then the Lisbon Treaty in 2007, which essentially established the European Union. Okay, that was the first stage of a new context. The second thing that happened in Europe was the fall of the wall in 1989. This, of course, heralded the signal of the end of the Cold War, and it was the collapse of the Soviet Union, or as the quip used to be, remember the USSR? Well, it's actually a USSR, because the eradication of the Soviet Union per se, which freed especially the Central European countries to become part of this whole Western alliance, notably Poland and Hungary then became part of the European Union. Something else happened with the fall of the wall, and that was it showed the force of peaceful protests and political change. And it allowed for European integration, it accelerated the process of European integration, and it facilitated expansion of the European Union. The last thing too is there was a cultural and social impact. The fall of the wall had profound cultural and social impacts in the newfound freedoms, but most of all on European Jewish existence. For the first time, Jews who might have been afraid to show their identity because of the repression of communism or the terror of the Holocaust suddenly found that they were able to reassert themselves. We'll get onto that in a minute. The third thing that happened, Lior, if you could talk in Europe. Lior, yes, is the whole era of reparations began. Again, much under the pressure of the United States, nevertheless, European countries began to come to terms with the role that they had played in the Holocaust, and the reparations begin. Now, why was that so important for the flourishing of European Jewry? Because among other things, it meant that there was some funding that was available that wasn't before. Something unique took place in Sweden. Sweden was neutral during the war. There was no need for reparations. There was no legal, thankfully, there was no loss of life. There was no loss of property. But because of Lior, because of the back one, yeah, who you see on your left, then Social Democrat Prime Minister, Göran Persson, and the secretary, his Deputy Secretary General, Jan Eliasson. He was able, and it's still a bit of a mystery, what bothered him was he didn't feel that that being neutral was such a virtue. In fact, just the opposite. He felt that Sweden carried a great burden. It did allow, after all, there were certain things, it allowed the transport of Nazi forces over Sweden territory into Norway with devastating results for the Norwegian Jews. But over and above that, he felt this moral obligation that Sweden had to do something, but it didn't owe anyone anything as far as legally, as far as compensating them. That didn't exonerate him. And he began to talk about something else that was lost, not just tragic loss of life and property, but there was something else lost, a European culture, Jewish culture. And he began to talk to the then two heads of the community, Gabriel Erwitz, who you also see on your screen, and Lena Posner-Karashi. And what was determined was that an institute would be formed that would be mandated to reignite Jewish culture in Europe. To my great sometimes distress, just at that time, I was I took a leave of absence from the Hartman Institute, where I was teaching, to come and join my husband, who was then already the chief rabbi of the great synagogue. And Eureka, the next step. Paideia, the European Institute for Jewish Studies in Sweden, was formed with, if you want to have some sleepless nights, to become the director of an institute whose mandate is to reignite European Jewish culture. Well, what it did do, though, is that it put me, those first years, Annalie, you were as well, Annalie traveled around Europe to try to recruit some participants, some students for this new institute, which was going to reignite European Jewish life. Annalie, she remarkably, I don't know how you did it, Annalie, recruited. Actually, we gave her and Noah Hermela, we gave them train tickets, Euro rail tickets, and said, go out, do this. And they did. But as well, I traveled all around Europe. Oh, actually, I don't know why we lost all of it. Anyway, there we go. People showed up from all sorts of countries, but there was something unusual about these people and who came to the Institute. We began to call them the dis-assimilators. Why that name? Well, they were people that as adults were finding out that they were part of the Jewish enterprise. There was one little girl, not so much a little, not yet an adult, 10 years old, standing in the kitchen when her mother from Poland told her, listen, you're Jewish, but don't tell anyone. There's a woman, I don't think she's here right now, from Serbia, whose mother actually went to the dentist. We call this the root canal story, who goes to the dentist, and the dentist says, listen, we're starting up a minion. Maybe you'd like to come. And she said, why would I want to come? He says, because your name is Levi. She says, what does that mean? She went back home and they began to look through the past of her now deceased father-in-law, began to understand he was a Jew. She took her little girl with her to synagogue. That girl is now a leader of Jewish life in Serbia. There was someone else who was playing polo in Hungary, and he calls out to someone in the opposite team, hey, you dirty Jew. The coach drags him, pulls him out of the water. He says, we don't use those words anymore. He called his parents pick him up, and he said, we don't say that anymore. Not only that, you're Jewish. These are people that were finding out that they were Jewish, and perhaps because they're European, and Europeans understand that if you're part of a culture, of course, you're literate in that culture. You couldn't be Spanish and not have read Cervantes. You couldn't be French and not have read Molière. You couldn't be English and not have read Shakespeare. I mean, you have to become literate. So these dis-assimilators now began to step forward. Look at who these people are, by the way. They were remarkable. And they wanted to study, or you can go on. They wanted to study text. They wanted to know what are the texts, what are the core of the culture. And actually, it so resonated who was then the head of our academic committee, Moshe Habertal, I think you've heard of him, who wrote a book called People of the Book. Rather than searching for the essence of Judaism and shared beliefs and practices that remain constant, though they take superficially diverse forms, I've chosen to focus on the shared commitment to certain texts and their role in shaping many aspects of Jewish life and endowing the tradition with coherence. In the Jewish tradition, the centrality of text takes the place of theological consistency. So to make the first mandate of this institute, if it was going to have people reclaim Jewish life and become creative in it, they had to become literate. They couldn't just know about Judaism. They had to become literate in it. They had to be absorbed. And Annalie was part of that first class. Okay. And then comes now, if something remarkable. If in America you know how to be Jewish, in Israel you know what it is to be Jewish, come to Israel and you can learn why to be Jewish, because these people could come up with testimonies. You could ask them, why did you become Jewish? Why? And listen to some of these testimonies. Okay, starts out being rather understood. I have moral obligation to my grandparents. I want to recover what was lost. I'm in search of becoming European beyond nationalism. And I should complete the sentence here. And Jews have always been Europeans. Someone else, I finally feel at home in a culture of complexity and nuance. Oh my goodness, look at that in the simplicities of today. I feel at home in a culture that sees the richness of dispute. I want to be part of a religion that honors my doubts. I want to be part of an antinomian culture. That's a beautiful one. And I thought, oh my goodness, the Enlightenment hits, Leibniz hits the Jewish text. I found my language, says another. I had been the only one asking questions in my class, said someone else. I love the safeguards against fundamentalism, the interpretive tradition. You want to know why to be Jewish? Ask these people. They have the why. Something remarkable took place for them. And now what was produced were these literate leaders who then became creative in reclaiming Jewish culture. We're just going to, Leora, you can just browse through. Victoria in Ukraine, David Stolera from France, a remarkable, he did, an architect who puts up booths where people can study Chavruta with non-Jews. Marina in Riga, deputy director of the Jewish Museum. Keep on going. I mean, there's Ute Steyer, who's now originally from Germany, actually, now the rabbi of the Great Synagogue of Stockholm. Lilia, the founder of Juice in Ukraine. Okay, Marcel, many of you might know him. He's now the head of the JCC, but originally he's Linda Ban, also from Hungary, the founder and director of the BBY. And it goes on and on. Petr from Czech Republic, Dagmara, Shaul Bassi. Go on to Shaul Bassi. Go to Venice, by the way, you're going to find. Look at that. I mean, it goes, actually, with so many cards, we couldn't even print them up. Leora, you can just, okay, maybe go back for a second. Min is the co-founder of Haver in Serbia. By the way, they've had anti-Semitic paintings on their doors. Nina has gone through a lot. Pavlina, Marcin, I want to stop for a second, Marcin from Poland. When the war broke out in Ukraine, he was on the phone within the day, organizing, since this is a pan-European group now, of close to 900 graduates of Paideia programs. Marcin got together a whole network of people who began to house the Ukrainians, who transported them, who fed them, who housed them. Noah, now the director of Paideia. Onward and onward. Something else, though, happened in 2014. Not only are these remarkable, this dis-assimilating generation of people who know why they're Jewish and have become literate. In 2014, Amelie, I think you were part of this group, the Glämsta Declaration. They came out with let me just read you some of this. We are a group of activists, thinkers, and artists united by a commitment to the renewal of Jewish life and culture in Europe. In recent years, matters relating to anti-Semitism, the Shoah, and the state of Israel have come to define Jewish interaction with the larger European community. While we acknowledge the importance of these topics, we are also concerned that an exclusive focus on them does not do justice to the richness and breadth of what Jewish life and culture have to offer. We strongly believe, in particular, that Jewish thought and experience can make important contributions to the ongoing endeavor for a more just and democratic Europe. To that end, we propose the following. These are people that feel themselves a part of the European endeavor. You cannot understand them without understanding that. Now, they come up with 4 points. I'm so sorry, we have to be short. We see European Jewish culture as integral to Europe and no less indispensable to Europe's self-understanding than, for example, the legacy of classical antiquity or the ideas of the Enlightenment, that the Jewish voice is integral to Europe. Secondly, What is the center of the life of these people? How do they organize them? Is it the synagogue? Is it national parades? Who knows what? We envision the Beit Midrash, the house of study, as the center of the Jewish community. This is the key element in our project, is to reclaim the Beit Midrash and methodologies in order to engage in texts, not simply as sources of authority, but as sources of inspiration, questioning, and discovery. Where there are texts, there are always intertextuality. Texts beget other texts, including those from other traditions, and call for renewed readings and interpretations. Leora, we're going to get to the last point, which had me in tears. Number of members by itself, because people always look at Europe and say, oh, but there's so few, is not an adequate measurement of the vibrancy of, by the way, vibrancy of, I have to move. Vibrancy of Jewish life. What others may read as a weakness in population size is for us an historic opportunity for engagement with our broader communities. The maintenance of a thriving Jewish, I can't read that, signifies the cooperation of people with diverse personal relations and affinities. 4, Jewish thought and experience have important insights to contribute to the European Jewish community. Jewish communities can provide a model for minority citizenship. This is something that American Jews were never aware of, and that is the Jews in Europe have always understood that they're part of a minority citizenship based on the principles of integration without assimilation. And this is where the tears came. Last not least, we believe that Jewish thought can contribute to European Jewish values by providing examples of how universalizing claims are constantly examined through the multiplicity of voices. Why did this make me cry? And this is the last 3 we'll spend with tonight. It made me cry for another reason. This is the third voice. Not only a third voice because of America, Israel, and Europe, there is a third European Jewish voice. The first 2, you're very well familiar with, Chassidut, who find meaning through experience. There's the Mitnagdim, who found meaning through halakha and law, but there was also the tradition, the third European Jewish voice of the Maskilim. You found meaning through thought and philosophy, and you used it to converse with other cultures. It went further. There were first the Maskilim, that was from the end of the 18th century into the 19th century. Let's quickly do this, and then you'll understand what's being threatened. Okay, that was the Haskalah. These are people like Moses Mendelssohn, David Friedlander. Then it was renewed in the late 19th century through philosophy in the Lehrhaus, Franz Rosenzweig, Martin Buber, Eugene Rosenstock Hussey, Gershon Scholem. These are luminaries who believe that Jewish thought has a lot to contribute to Europe and the conversation with others, and they became a Jewish intellectual force. And that's what the Glämsta Declaration was saying. We can be a Jewish intellectual movement. Now, can you understand the crisis of October 7th? And this is really a crisis. First of all, is there a Europe? We've already seen the populism that threatens it. The Renaissance has been led by young, mostly liberal. They're caught in this pincher between the right and the left. I don't know if you've been reading the newspaper. Their self-understanding is threatened. Yet, they have always been aware of themselves. Annalie, I'm talking about you, minority status, and they've always been realistic. It happened here. Leora, one final thing, and then I want to talk with Annalie. I have great fears for this group. I fear for their physical safety. I won't talk about what is happening in Israel. I fear for their physical safety too. I fear for their existential crisis because there's a loss of, could be a loss of understanding of their place in society. As the Glämsta Declaration said, the minority citizenship. Historically, I fear the loss of that third voice. It's such a precious one, it's such a unique one. It's that third voice in Europe. Anyway, we've had an earthquake. And Annalie, if I could really ask you about that earthquake and how you see it. You're trained as a reporter, you're head of the major Scandinavian Jewish journal, the Judiska Chronica. And I want to know what you see. By the way, we've seen such varying reports about Sweden. We saw that the Crown Princess attended the Shabbat services this last Shabbat. And on the other hand, we've heard about people feeling very threatened. If we could have, from your perspective, how do you understand the October 7th and its effect on Swedish Jewry?
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you everyone who is listening this evening. It's a pleasure to be on this call with you. So just literally a week before October 7th, the big Swedish book fair, which is one of the Scandinavian countries' biggest book fairs, if not one of the big ones in Europe, actually had Jewish culture as a theme. Paideia was there, the Jewish Chronicle was there, this other organization called Jewish Culture in Sweden was there, everyone were there. And we celebrated through thought. We had all of these writers from Israel, from the States, from Europe. We had comedians, there was a Jewish happy hour. I have not experienced a more successful integration with Swedish and beyond cultural life as during that weekend. And then of course, only a week later, October 7th happened. And the earth is trembling. The fall from that moment at the book fair to where we are today is tremendous. And had it happened the reverse way, I'm not sure if we could have had the experience at the book fair. Though I'm very happy that we had it. So today, I have a girl joining the call here. So today, just a second. Sorry.
Hello. I'm so glad you could join us. Yeah.
Sweden and Sasha. It's Sasha. I'm checking now. We don't have a lot of time. Ni får gå nu. Det är precis nu som jag ska prata. Så du måste ta henne. Okay. So the very.
We're glad to have Sasha here. We're glad to have her.
Sorry guys, it's bedtime for her. That's why. So what I see is that we are tired of having our existence questioned. We are in Sweden having a great support from not just the royal house, but also the politicians and the government, which is very clear. And so my kids go to the Jewish school here, and the prime minister came on November 9th, the day of the pogroms in Germany, and just to kind of show his support. But I've never seen an avalanche of hatred so big in social media, in some of the public media houses, in some of the chat rooms, especially over social media, in my lifetime, as what I'm experiencing right now. And it's hard to discern, right? What are chatbots even, or what are these bots today, and what is a real legitimate fear, and what is actually a threat to our physical existence. If we compare to Denmark, which is interesting, the synagogue there has been showered with flowers. There was a big march walking against anti-Semitism, and we haven't quite seen that in Sweden coming from people, even though the Jewish community certainly sees and feels the support from the government and from, the king and the queen and their family. So it's double, it's both.
Okay, Annalie, thank you so much. I have so many more questions to ask you, but I know I'm trying to keep to the.
Barbara, we can have like 2-3 more questions.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay,
good. So, what are your greatest concerns, Annalie, at this point? What are you most concerned about as far as your future, as far as the future of the Jewish community? Where do you see it going?
It feels like the earth is trembling all over, right? I mean, just the reports coming out of the US, the situation in Israel with an extremely split country before October 7th, and now a unity that is there. But we also know with this unity of Am Yisrael Chai, there are people in the Israeli society that are being alienated. And what will happen after the war is over and people will start fighting over who's responsible and not and who should go. We don't know that yet. And under this surface, you still have this deep division. In Europe, I think I choose to see the strength in the networks that have been built that were so quickly activated, as you mentioned, Barbara, during the Ukraine war. And that now have geared towards supporting Israeli families coming to Europe. 10 kids started in the Jewish school just last week through families who left Israel. Those decisions were made very quickly.
Okay.
So I think more than ever, there's a feeling of a tight-knit community that is global. And that will hopefully help each other wherever we are, whether it's in Israel, in Europe,
okay,
or in the States. That gives me strength. And for now, it's so, yeah, okay, yeah.
Annalie, I have to confess, I mean, we're not supposed to have favorites, but I must say, you're just a favorite of mine and dear to everyone's heart. I mean, you've really been at the forefront of this new European Jewish entity from the very beginning, from those Europasses on that we gave you. I would like to, I think there's many reasons to be truly concerned. I would like to end in something, sort of a glimmer of hope. Leora, I think you'll be able to testify. Leora made a round of some of the alumni and Leora, by the way, maybe you can even show in the end of the PowerPoint. Leora made a round of some of the alumni because the thought was that, of course, everyone will want to be in conversation with each other. And you asked them, what would you like the subject of, should we share our agonies, what's going on? And they answered by saying, let's study text. Tomorrow night, there's a sort of mass studying of text among the alumni. And I must say, we've been through great crises before, perhaps none greater than in 76 with the destruction of the Second Temple, because as Moshe Habertal has put it, until then, the way peoples communicated with their gods and we with ours was through watching the smoke of the sacrifice go up to heaven. And when the temple was destroyed, the question was, how are people going to communicate with God? And step forward Yochanan ben Zakkai, who escaped from the then destroyed city of Jerusalem, about to be destroyed, and he appeared before Vespasian, then the governor of ancient Israel, and the Roman governor, and soon to be the emperor and Roman emperor. And he asked for, and I know many of you know this, Tein li Yavne v'chachameha, give me Yavne and its wise men, its philosophers actually. Give me the chance, give us the chance to study. And as Moshe Halbertal once said, you know, when people didn't know where to find God, they found God on the pages of the Talmud. And I can't help but think that this resilient and remarkable group, Amelie, of which you're first and foremost a part, this remarkable European Jewish voice will not be quelled. Anyway, it's with that glimmer of hope. That's perhaps more a prayer than anything, but I think now I think we want to turn to the questions and answers. We wanted to give time for everybody to participate in this. And Lior and Annalie, will you help me with the questions and answers?
So thank you very, very much. I'm going to jump right into questions, and obviously I'll be directing them to you, Barbara, and you decide if you want to pass them on to either Lior or Annalie. So I'll go back a little and I'll ask a little bit more about Paideia, like who funds it? How many current students do you have? Is it happening these days in person or online? What is the focus of your studies? Is it more Bet Midrash style or more speakers? So if you can just give a little more about Paideia itself.
Gladly. We're presently in session in person. Paideia now has a branch as well, which is called the Focal School, which is a college of higher learning, which is geared for Swedes. There's some 600 participants in that alone. But the core Paideia program is the one-year program, which gives perhaps the most intensive course in Jewish literacy on an MA level, 16 semester courses in 1 year. People come from all over Europe for that, and it's taught by the supreme teachers, each of whom gives a 2-week course. Now, we learned something a secret. Anybody on the highest level in a university, the professors can take off for 2 weeks and come to Sweden. So we're able, don't say. So we're able to get the best. Yair Zakovich, Victor Sheinan from Midrash. I mean, if you know these names, so we run the gamut of the best 16 intensive literature courses in Jewish literature. And then we have what Lior has been a part of, the project incubator. People want to know now how to become activists. Lior has been a part of that. There's something else called the Paradigm Program, which takes seriously this notion of a Jewish European intellectual movement. And we have a week of sort of an intensive philosophic immersion. And who funds it? Originally, it was founded through a grant of the Swedish government. And that was rather remarkable. Unfortunately, it was a one-time grant, and we were on our own. Actually, people responded. I did a lot of time in fundraising in the States, which was really rather remarkable, because in fundraising, conversation with people. And so we were able to do that. Right now, a great deal of our funding comes from the European Union, because they see us as the quintessential European project, that we promote a European identity, which is actually the and as they say, Jewish identity has been the European identity, So the EU, for a great extent, now the Swedish government as well gives a grant. Unfortunately, it doesn't cover everything. The Focal School, it is funded by the government. We still do fundraising, and actually, as someone once said to me, thank you for allowing us to participate in this. I think it's a remarkable thing to see what these people are. More about the program, close to 900 graduates all over Europe. You can find them, just scratch the surface and you'll find them. And a strong alumni network, by the way, a yearly conference throughout Europe. You're invited. This year it's going to be where, Annalie? I forgot where our conference is going to be. In any case, I thought it might be in Croatia. In any case, we had
Saloniki.
It's right. So we're gonna go Greek, which is now. By the way, a lot of it's contained in the word Paideia. Paideia is a Greek term, but that was a Greek concept that Alexander the Great brought to the ancient Near East. That said, you know what? If you want to become, they couldn't control all these all these cultures. So they gave a way for people to become Greek, and that was through studying Greek text. That was Paideia. Ben Sira in the 1st century, before the Common Era, took that notion and formed the first Bate Midrash. Paideia is a Beit Midrash, but we used this European word, Paideia, to show that we're dedicated to the enrichment of the conversation between Europe and Judaism. We learned our Beit Midrash is really because there was Greek Paideia. So there's a lot just in the word itself. You don't have to. One of the acceptance questions, by the way, to become accepted in Paideia is spell it. I hope you can.
Well, I put it also in the chat so people can feel safe on that now. There are many questions, so I'll try and pick and choose and combine some of them. If you can say a little about who are the groups in Europe that you find more supportive of the Jewish community these days, who are the other groups that are feeling more alienated? Obviously, that includes some questions about the Muslim presence in Europe. And if also you can give some, like the difference that Annelie mentioned between Denmark and Sweden is fascinating. And I mean, thinking of the march that was in France a couple of days ago. So if you can also mention a little bit of the differences that you're seeing around Europe in these different groups, supporting or not supporting the Jewish community.
Listen, I think in no small sense, the threat to the Jews is a threat to Europe as well. We're seeing it come from both sides. We're seeing it come, I think the greatest danger to Judaism in Europe is from the side of populism, of the right, of the rebirth of nationalisms, after all, populisms don't exist without an enemy, and the classic enemy of populism has been the Jew. We're the elite. Quintessentially, sometimes by choice, we engage in thought, among other things. I think that's a tremendous threat. I think Europe is under threat as well.
I'd like to
go ahead.
I just want to add something because I just did a survey of many of our alumni, specifically those in the hotspot cities. You've all been reading the news and watching both local news, but also what's going on. And we can see France, and we can see Berlin, and we can see London. And so we chose alumni from and Amsterdam, some of those cities. And I just want to say one thing about the Muslim-Jewish relations. And what I noticed in this series of mapping out and interviews was where there was a relationship that had been created, that existed, and was somewhat strong and tried prior to October 7th. After an initial 2-week waiting period of breathing and not wanting, and this dance of who's going to call who first, and it's uncomfortable, and what are we going to say, and what are they thinking? What is the other side thinking about me? Most of those relationships lasted and were healthy and were soothing to both sides. Not immediately. It took a few weeks, but and we've seen these. Sometimes it's institution to institution. Sometimes it's a grassroots social innovator with another grassroots social innovator who have done things together. Sometimes it's on the religious level where a mosque has been doing something traditionally with the synagogue during holidays, during Sukkot, during Ramadan, and they were able to weather this as delicate as it is. And where there was no relationship, then there's a vacuum, and that vacuum is also dangerous because, as Barbara's saying, it's all a matter of who's next in line. And one of the interviews I had was in London, where they were saying that many of the, let's say, white supremacist thugs were coming out in the street, and all of a sudden the Jewish community was like, they were coming out to say England for England, but they were a counter protest to the Palestinians. And the Jews were saying, wait a sec, but they're not on our side. It's kind of a counter protest. So it should be, oh, if they're against the, pro-Hamas or pro-Gaza, so it should be on our side, but it's not. And so this is a very delicate kind of a spiraling thing where the relationships are being figured out, and the alliances of who's really looking after kind of a liberal voice of how Europe should look, which should be traditionally should be good for the Jews, right? Barbara, I just wanted to kind of add that part from the interviews.
No, good.
I think could I mention in Sweden, we've seen a kind of scary joint action by the Swedish cultural community, which always has felt that Israel is uncomfortable to touch, like they'd rather just not deal with Israel than at all, because they feel uncomfortable with what might happen if people associate different cultural institutions with Israel. And of course, with the current Israeli government, that has become even more difficult. So it's in a sense the worst time for this to happen. So the discourse in Sweden now is quite toxic, with a very one-eyed pro-Palestinian movement, which has very little empathy for the massacre and for what Israelis went through, joined together with kind of the cultural left. So that is, we don't know how that will play out still, actually.
So another, and again, I'm trying to combine questions here. Are you able, because you're in the unique position of having people kind of spread across Europe, are you able to kind of see if there's a gap or difference between what we're seeing on social media and what's happening on the ground? Because there are protests like for Israel, supporting Israel. There are also things that are happening. How would you describe the relationship, or if you're able to see the differences between what we're seeing in social media and online and what we're seeing on the ground, or what's happening on the ground?
Look, as Annalie already indicated, I think we all become aware that social media can really be quite toxic. And there's always the question, to what sense is this representative of is there a social media reality, and is there a reality? And does one, of course, cause another? We're also afraid to what is being nourished by the social media, how much would take place without it. That's become a moot question. I think it's one that humanity is going to have to deal with altogether. But I think that the reality out there, it's very, as Leora indicated, I think that it's very complex. I think that there are some Jews in Europe that are extremely alienated by the right-wing government of Palestine, in other words, of Palestine, of Israel. And I think that that there, on the one hand, a total solidarity of being appalled by the massacre when what took place. And there's just, and the condemnation of Hamas. I think too that we have to be a little bit more refined as we speak as well. What we've seen, by the way, and I think people wanted to deny, is we saw the Jihad manifesto. We saw that their challenge is to kill Jews. There's no kill Jews altogether in Israel, wherever they could be. And I think that must be fought, and it must be condemned, and that must be unilateral, and that is not complex. The question of the Palestinians becomes complex. Do people suffer? Can we reach out to them, even though, in a sense, they've allowed the Hamas to take place? To what extent do those people bear responsibility? That's where the complexity comes in. And of course, you see people and Jews lining up, some feeling quite, as one, by the way, one person that Leora interviewed said, this is someone from France, I'm frightened enough to feel that I want to go to Israel, but I'm alienated enough from what's taking place in Israel to feel that that can't be my home. so I'm going to stay where I am. There's dangers wherever I am. That's a complexity. Here's someone who really, and by the way, she's a great Jewish leader in and of herself. And on the one hand, she's frightened by what's happening in France. And by the other, she can't really feel at home, honestly, in Israel because of the present government. Isn't that, now there we are as Jews, by the way. Remember that person who said, I abhor simplicity? Well, guess what? Congratulations. We have all the complexity we could want, and more so. We'll sort this out. I think that the battle is far from over. I think the question of the hostages makes everything, sort of suspends all moral judgment. Everybody is sleepless in Israel, certainly, and I think around the world. This is a horror that we are collectively experiencing that I think is, this is a collective horrifying experience. We're having a collective nightmare. How we emerge from it is yet to be seen. The battle is not over.
Well, thank you. Just before I give Ari the mic, I do want to ask one small question that came up here and I think is very relevant. And it's, what do you think about the way the Swedish press is reporting and commenting about the war? Because we have Annalie here.
Definitely, Annalie.
Annalie can give you the answer.
Well, my husband is part of that Swedish press. He just returned from Tel Aviv, where he was reporting for the Swedish public radio. We have a wonderful Palestinian colleague who's reporting for the TV channels. And I'd say quite objectively, they're doing a wonderful, remarkable job holding humanity, in this case, holding both narratives or all the narratives, because there are several. So as a journalist, I would say, I definitely say that the traditional media outlets are doing just fine and very well. Now, I'm not sure that the different groups experience it that way. I think from both the Jewish side and from the Palestinian side, they feel that it's not enough on their own side. But as a journalist, I feel they're doing a very good job. In terms of what you mentioned before, Shirel, the social media, the TikTok, for example, which is the strongest outlet of news for young people, it's a totally different story. And that is what scares me, really. We just interviewed for our magazine 3 ninth graders in the Jewish school. And the stories they told about what's going on social media are quite horrifying.
Thank you. So Ari, if you can join us.
Yes, even though many times Shirel is leading the program, I'm always in the background working and listening. So I've been listening to this one in particular because I've heard of Paideia for many years, since we've hosted as our 1-month scholar in residence at CSP, Yair Zakovich, Avigdor Shinan, Paul Lips. So we have an overlap of scholars. So first quick question though, is Paideia only open to Europeans? Does that include Israelis and as Europeans? But what about Americans? Can Marian Brackett get on with Faith on an airplane and fly to Paideia and study with you guys? Or is it only Europeans? That's the first question. Then I have a more substantive question about current politics.
Well, there's a very practical answer to that. Americans can and do participate, but they're not subsidized. Europeans are subsidized. Because that.
No worries. Marian and Faith, they'll take care of their own fees, and we'll put them on.
Are Israelis subsidized?
What? Well, by the way, Israelis have been, because we feel there are ways for Israelis to be educated well, Jewishly as well. In other words, there are alternatives for them. It's true, it's not the exposure to the European entity, and we're sorry about that, but for the same reason. In other words, our priority is to reignite European Jewish culture. And I think we're doing a remarkable job. Americans do participate in the Paradigm program, by the way. And right now, Josh Hollow from HUC wants to perhaps even import that program to the US, which is really quite remarkable. Like I say, it's an intellectual movement. I think it's the third European voice. I'm glad to see it spread.
Well, our honoree Ingrid, who's on, Dr. Schilling is on, and he's from Sweden, has wanted CSP to, we go on adventures, has wanted us to go to Sweden. So if we go to Sweden, we will come and spend time at your institution.
You must.
And
By the way, let me add something else. Actually, you don't have to go anywhere else in Europe. You can meet Europe. You can meet all of Europe in Sweden. So how's that? Well, that adds to us. We just got back from Spain, so in a private conversation or follow-up, I'm rather interested to see what you guys have achieved in Spain, because we didn't see too much. We saw in Madrid and Barcelona. We
were in Barcelona. Yeah, we went to the Atid community.
Okay.
But that, I would like to have met a few more people. We did not get to meet people.
Okay, so there's a huge activist hub of Jewish social entrepreneurism that is basically out of a place called Mosaica, which are all of our alumni who have kind of created a club there, and 101 different sub projects going on. So
well, we need to talk because we didn't see that, and that was something we missed. I will tell you that. Yep, go ahead.
No, let's do it the other way around. You tell us where you're going in Europe, and we'll tell you who to meet.
I believe unofficially we're going to go to Germany next fall in November, and the theme is roots and rebirth, Germany then and now, and we're going to be in Frankfurt, the Schum cities, Nuremberg, and Berlin. And the goal is to go back to medieval Jewish history, the origins of Ashkenaz, all the way up to contemporary German social issues with respect to Israel and the Holocaust, and meet German Jews who are involved in shaping Jewish experience in Germany. So I'm sure you guys you can help us on that.
Yes, we sure do.
So the question is, and I feel like it's missed. I live in America. I live in Irvine. I feel very safe here. We have people who are very everyone should be vigilant, and I think Europeans maybe more so than Americans. But I think we've also read so much that people are very worried here. And people are posting things like, this is what it's felt like in Europe in the 1930s and so on. And I just fundamentally disagree with that, particularly since I read the news, watch the news, and Annalie pointed out that the governments are against all of these things that are going on. This is not Europe of the 1930s, the government. And I think the story that people really missed is the fact that 150,000 people showed up to march in France against anti-Semitism. And I just want to get your thoughts on how come so many people showed up and what that means to all of you.
I want to take a crack, and then Barbara will probably put an umbrella on it. But I don't want to be naive in what's going on in Europe, and nobody wants to. There's, unlike in the 1930s, where it was the government who was leading the anti-Semitism, here we really have, and this goes back to Barbara's lecture about the European Union and the role the European Union is taking in fighting anti-Semitism, in funding projects about Holocaust education in a very innovative fashion, about taking this on as this is not a Jews do not have to fight anti-Semitism, or they shouldn't be in the front of it. In Europe, it is a national problem that we as governments have to take on. At the same time, the population is many, I'm not saying all, but there's populist movements that are very anti-Semitic and are and they're coming, and they're not in favor of their governments. There's governments are kind of tiptoeing, or coming out with clarity, but also all of a sudden saying, "Ooh, maybe I took 2 steps forward. How is this going to hurt me in the elections? Where are things going?" So Barbara or Annalie, both of you, take it and give it a framework. But that's I think we got to realize there's kind of a push me, pull me thing going on there.
Okay, Ari, I think you pointed out to begin, and Leora, you expanded on it. I think the fact that the governments, this is not, of course, thank God, Europe of the 30s, or the 40s. The governments are in full support. However, again, the rise of populism in Europe, which is again nationalist movements, anti-elite, always with a victim, a despised group, traditionally Jews for many reasons. I think this is a real threat. I think we have to be afraid for Europe. And if the European Union falls, then I think we're in a different situation for Jews. I think it sounds, now they're one of the best allies the Jews have had, and as are the governments. And I think it's been remarkable. I think it's heartening, and I think hopefully we can wait for this wave of social media to just go out, let the tides go out. But is it dangerous? Yes. Is it threatening? Yes. Annalie, what's your feeling? Annalie?
So just to tie into the social media wave. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
No.
Yeah. The social media wave. The social media wave scares me because platforms such as Fridays for Future, Greta's platform, if you know her, she's influencing masses of environmental activists. They've really taken a stand in this conflict, which of course is upsetting some people in terms of they care about the environment, but they don't want to be dragged into politics. But the fact that so many young people across the globe are influenced in this idea of decolonialization, and that Israel is a colonializing project, and that Jews are these white people who are doing these to Palestinians, I think is a real issue that I hear in the discourse of many people at the moment. And I think social media in that sense has more impact than we maybe want to imagine or envision. In terms of France, it's interesting. I used to live there. I should have followed it more. I'm thinking if I'm thinking freely now, but I think the massacre that Hamas committed kind of made their masks fall, not only to Netanyahu or to Israelis, but possibly also to people in Europe and in France. And there have been a lot of anti-Semitic acts in France for decades now, where families have been shot and killed, elderly people have been murdered. There was a French young woman being stabbed as she opened her door the other day. You probably read all this in the news. This has been a real issue in France, and I'm hoping that people have had enough, and kind of seeing that the kind of anti-Semitism that Hamas is promoting has a global potential and is extremely scary. And it's not just about territory; it's also about Jews and wherever they are. So hopefully, some people are waking up and starting to call out Hamas and its ideology for what it is. I got a question too in the chat before that was beautifully written in Swedish. So it's someone who speaks Swedish here in the audience. It was a question about Malmö, this infamous town in the south of Sweden, who used to have a mayor who was anti-Semitic. He didn't think so himself, but definitely his statements were, which meant that any kind of work you did it. I should say also that Malmö has a large Muslim population, a lot of immigrants. Every time anything happens in Israel-Palestine, it has an explosive effect in Malmö. And the Jewish community there is extremely small. It's a few hundred people, it used to be much bigger before. And people are leaving town not only to seek out a more invigorating Jewish life, richer Jewish life, because the community is so small, but also because of anti-Semitism. However, especially Malmö has gone through a journey where it's still a socialist leadership of the city, but they've really taken anti-Semitism seriously. There was a project called Amana with the town imam and a very spiritual and thoughtful rabbi from Israel who came, and they started a lot of dialogue work. And for a long time, things evolved to the better in Malmö, and the Jewish community got a more positive presence in the city. The last thing I heard from Amana was that its work was stopped from October 7th because the imam immediately went out on social media and supported Palestine. And so it's come to a halt. I don't think it's I don't think it's over. That's what I called the rabbi and asked, and he said it's just on pause for now. But I know that there are a lot of trust issues because of the statement from the imam. And I also know that a lot of the religious leaders in the Stockholm Jewish community are surprised that no Muslim community in Sweden officially has come out to denounce the acts of Hamas in a public way. Individuals have, yes, but it hasn't happened in an organized way. And I think a lot of people feel heartbroken about that.
Thank you. We need to wrap up. We're quite over time. I want to first of all thank you very, very much for sharing what is not only like life work and politics, but also obviously very personal. I'm kind of thinking how to end on a hopeful note. I will say that to me, it's fascinating to see how what's happening is also clarifying the deep connections of the Jewish community across the world between the US and Europe and Israel, something that I think hasn't been maybe as clear in the last decade, and I think it has become very clear, and I think that's very special. And I do want to also say that possibly supporting localized, face-to-face, humans to humans meetings and interactions is the best way to counter the horrors of social media. So I want to thank you for opening this with us, for being with us here, for sharing what you see. I'm sure we'll meet again in more talks and contexts. Thank you everyone for joining. Your presence is always a pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you in future programs. Toda rabba. Thank you.